everyone. Welcome home. Good to have you with me on this Tuesday. As you'd expect, I have a lot to share with you. We're going to start today in Kenya, where a curfew is in place and it has led to a spike in complaints of police brutality. The directive is pretty straightforward. Everyone must remain in their homes from dusk till dawn. But what if you have no home? What happens then? We're going to be bringing you a story from Kenya's homeless community. It is heart-wrenching and you will not want to miss it. Also ahead, the blow of this pandemic is being felt right around the world. No sector has been spared. The pain is everywhere. But what does this pandemic mean for tourism? We're going to be taking a closer look at what coronavirus means for Africa's tourism sector. And innovation at its finest. There are people on the continent doing remarkable things right now. We're going to find out about a company that is using drones. Yeah, you heard right. They're using drones to deliver masks and gloves and other essentials to places on the continent that need them the most. I'm going to be speaking to one of the brains behind Zipline International. So much to dig into. Let's get started. All right. It's just 10 p.m. in Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya right now, and the curfew is in effect. The directive, as I've said, is clear from the government. Stay indoors. All residents must stay in their homes from dusk till dawn. Defiance of that order has had bloody and in some cases deadly consequences. Listen to this. According to the Kenyan government's Independent Policing Oversight Authority, more than 30 cases of police brutality have been recorded and at least 12 people have lost their lives. Now, to give you some kind of context, the coronavirus, which caused the curfew, which led to the curfew, has led to the death of 14 people. Only 2 more people than have been killed by police. Life has always been hard for the homeless community there in Kenya, talking specifically about Nairobi. Things have always been difficult. They've lived on the margins. But now, in this time of a pandemic, some are describing their suffering as almost unbearable. KTN's Timothy Otieno filed this report for us. Take a look.
If the coronavirus effects and the subsequent curfew it has since imposed on Kenya is hard on you, then imagine how it feels for street families. The dusk to dawn curfew, which begins every day at 7 p.m., means that after the cover of darkness envelops the city, only the bright lights of Nairobi's skyline remain as a form of solace for those left behind. And here is where I find these young boys tucked underneath this pavilion at the Uhuru Park. 5 minutes after the curfew kicks in, 56-year-old Stephen Okwemba walks to the dark dungeon he calls his home. It's a daily trek he makes from the nearby Wakulima market, where he scavenges for leftover fruits to help feed nearly 20 homeless boys.
Sasa tukilala asubuhi tukiamuka tunaangaliana hivi tu njaa vitu sasa namna hii tu. Sasa inanibidi niende sokoni na hii mfuko yangu hiyo. Huko sokoni na watu wananijua. Nachukua matunda naleta hapa tunakula hivi. Ikushikilia tu
Stephen is the oldest among the group. He joined the streets 2 years ago after he lost his job as a security guard in Kawangware. After failing to pay 6 months of his rent, he was eventually kicked out by the landlord.
Hauji kama mimi nakaa hapa. Sipokuwa nikienda tu huko ndio iko watu wetu wengi Kawangware. Sasa nikienda huko anauliza, "Ai, leo unapotea wapi? Ulipotea wapi?" Mimi naambia, "Mimi niko nyumbani kidogo, safari kidogo, nikarudi." Nikumbe niko hapa tu natanganya niko nyumba.
It's the kind of shame that accompanies anyone who decides the streets is their home. 19-year-old Musa Mohammed ran away from home in 2009 due to poverty and domestic violence. Street life has been his way of life, but he's the first to admit times have never been harder than they are since the corona pandemic hit Kenya.
Saa ingine unajipata mpaka ushaluzo kwa maisha. Yani you feel like dying. Yani mimi nishafika mahali mpaka nikasema acha nikufe tu. Unaenda kwa barabara unajiweka hivi, gari kugonga, hakuna gari na kugonga. Yani unafanya vitu tu kimalamala tu hivi, lakini
The despair has been instigated by the fact that restaurants and hotels don't operate during the curfew. A majority of street families would often benefit from the leftovers of such establishments. Now, not even begging can help the group because no one is in town at night.
Food tu, yani tuseme tu masafara wote as a whole ni food tu. Kitu itakuwa tu masafara wa live bila, hata kama msee anasikiza huyo mtu mwenye ataona hii kitu ajue kuna people behind huko wanaumia. For sure seriously wanaumia. Wanaumia kabisa.
Well, I'm pleased to say that Timothy Otieno joins us now from Nairobi, Kenya. Timothy, thank you for the great reporting. It really drives home how this pandemic is affecting different sectors of society, and that's not just in Africa, across the world, but how it's affecting people differently. Is there anyone in the Kenyan government who is paying attention to the specific needs of the homeless and the hungry as their situation worsens?
At the moment, Aisha, it doesn't seem like that is the case. And even if so, then they're not coming out clearly to bring out what specific measures they're putting in place to try and help these forgotten people on our streets. Now, the government has, over the last couple of weeks, issued out, in fact, they issue out press statements every day on the progress of how the crisis is being handled. The president has on so many occasions come out to issue cash incentives and cash reliefs to try and cushion small businesses and homeowners and all that, but no official statement from the government on how street families are being handled. And that's the gap that I saw and decided to go out and do this story, because by 7 p.m. Nairobi streets are empty, and people always tend to forget that there are people who depend on the nightlife, the night economy for their daily upkeep. And so when I went out, spoke to those boys a couple of nights ago and actually saw them share, a group of about 15 to 20 boys share just 2 oranges. And that was going to be their supper that night. You can imagine it was heartbreaking, to say the least. And the reactions to the story, which aired on local Kenyan television last evening, carried over to this morning. In fact, on Twitter, there was a hashtag trending, hashtag remember street kids, as a part of the conversation online in the country on how best these groups of people can be helped at the moment.
And what kind of ideas are emerging as more people are paying attention?
Well, an outpouring of support for those who are featured in that story. That young boy there whom you saw so emotional, his name is Musa Mohammed. And I'm happy to report that tonight he'll be having a roof over his head. He'll not be sleeping out in the cold anymore. Just about 2 hours ago, at around 7:30 Kenyan time, he was able to send me a text message and just told me, "Thank you, team. All 20 of us are now at a rescue center, children's center, in the outskirts of Nairobi, a place known as Rongai." So they've been taken up. 4 government officials came to their rescue this morning. They processed them, and this evening they're at that rescue center in Rongai, and they told me they are warm, they have a meal, the little things that we take for granted. I was just telling one of my friends, I always have supper. Sometimes I don't even finish my supper, and somebody's barely making it. So I'm happy to report that so far they have been able to get some help. But unfortunately, Aisha, there are so many more who are on Kenyan streets tonight, some of whom I could not reach and could not be able to share their story with me. And perhaps that calls for a much more sustainable, solution-based mechanism that can come from the government. We are yet to hear them talk about this particular story. They've not come out clearly to say what exactly they're doing. But over the last 3 weeks, as at last week, the government had stated that they had raised 1 billion Kenya shillings through the COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund. Aside from that, the president indeed had promised that he would set aside 2.6 billion shillings over the next 2 months to try and help fight this particular pandemic. We've seen the president himself and his deputy take 80% pay cuts in their salaries. The speakers of the National Assembly and the Senate have also taken 30% pay cuts, and they say these funds are supposed to be channeled towards helping the local, the people at the grassroots to try and solve this. But nothing substantive towards street families. The business community are a bit lucky in this fight. The president 2 weeks ago issuing out a raft of directive, including a tax refund worth 10 billion Kenya shillings to small and middle-income businesses. We saw income tax be reduced by tax, I beg your pardon, was scrapped for anybody earning 24,000 Kenya shillings and below, but nothing specifically to people who were highlighted in that particular story, Aisha.
We've seen a raft of economic measures that, as you say, benefit at least ease things for SME, small and medium sized enterprises. In terms of the fight itself, the health battle against coronavirus, where do things stand right now?
Today, 15 confirmed cases, according to the government press briefing, 15 more cases of the coronavirus, bringing the total of those confirmed to have the virus to 296. We're just 4 cases shy of the 300 mark, the highest, no doubt, in East Africa. But there is a bit of hope. Out of the 296, 74 of them have recovered and have since been discharged and are now recuperating and have been reintegrated back into society. And like you mentioned, 14 deaths so far. So the ministry and the government says so far so good, although we are not out of the woods just yet. Cases of people running away from isolation wards were run even in our news bulletins just this evening. People who have been taken there by the government for that 14-day mandatory self-quarantine. Just 2 days ago, in the northern part of Kenya, there was a group of people who bribed their way out of the isolation wards so that they could go back home. And the government really appalled by this move by Kenyans, several times stating that perhaps the population is not taking this disease as seriously as we should. And that's why you're seeing some of those measures of imposing a 10-hour curfew. There's been a ban on all social gatherings, as well as encouraging the local population to avoid the use of hard cash. Go the plastic way. If you're making any transactions, either use the credit cards or the mobile money, if you have one, and not many do, as well as the mobile money transfer systems, just to try and tell the public this is a serious disease, you need to take it seriously.
Yeah, we certainly do. Timothy Otieno, thank you so much for filing that report, sharing that report. I know it was originally aired on KTN, but thank you for sharing a special cut with us here on Home with Isha Sesay. It's great to have you with us, and we look forward to more of your reporting in the days ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Stay safe.
Thank you. You as well. So the view from Kenya there from Timothy Otieno with KTN News, a really different perspective on this crisis. We want to make sure here on Home with Isha Sesay that you get to see how this is affecting all walks of life, and that you really get a sense of the difficulty for some people when it comes to following these curfew directives or these lockdowns and how you observe social distancing. That was an example of the near impossibility for some people to be able to adequately follow those government directives. You've already started writing in, and I want to thank you for joining me me right at the top of the show and for being so moved by Timothy's reporting. Ibrahim S. Sesay, could be a relative, says, we are seeing the best of humanity in the worst of circumstances, encouraging reports from Kenya. Really encouraging to hear that that street family that Timothy reported on, that they've got a place to stay tonight, that they have a roof over their heads, and that they're able to have a warm meal. That is really heartening. So yes, I absolutely agree with that. Nick says, nice to see something substantive and relevant on Periscope. Roas Lex says, greetings from Dakar. Well done. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. Joshua Florenzo, that's awesome. You're writing in. Thanks for the detailed information from Nemeth Star Productions. Ramif Junior Kamara, kind words there. Aisha, you're inspiring. Thanks a million to help bring the true stories of Africans. I really appreciate all the comments. Please keep them coming in. I'll say it all the time. Your comments are the lifeblood of the show. We want to hear what you think. We want to hear what moves you. We want to hear stories that you're seeing and stories that interest you. So please write in, and I'll get to as many of those comments as I can throughout the hour. Thank you to everyone who's written in. Okay. This pandemic, this virus, the world, there are so many questions we are grappling with. As well as where our where are we to vaccine treatment? Is the virus mutating? What is coronavirus and its disease COVID-19? What is it doing in Africa? What is it doing specifically on our continent? Many questions. We're going to try and get to as many of them as we can. The science is still emerging, so for some of the stuff we just don't have answers, but we want to attempt to get to the heart of at least some of these issues with Professor Chima Ohuabunwo. He's a medical epidemiologist at the Morehouse School of Medicine, and he joins me now from Atlanta, Georgia. Professor, can you hear me?
Hi, Aisha. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for making the time to join us and to have this conversation. You know, I did, preface things by saying we don't know, hard and fast answers in many cases to these questions that we're going to, attempt to grapple with. But we need to have the conversation and see what's emerging. So let me start by asking you what you make of the rate of the spread of coronavirus in Africa compared to other parts of the world. What do you make of it? Because it does appear to be somewhat slower.
Sure, thank you. Good question. That's what entire world scientists were trying to figure out. But from this there's been no detailed study, but what we know from previous coronaviruses, the last two, the MERS, the SARS, they did not also, they kind of spared Africa for some unknown reasons. But one common thing is this disease, as you saw, broke out and was linked so much with international travel. So if you look at it from that perspective, yes, Africans travel, but most of the business world, the developed world, travel more. Going to China, Africans do, but most of the European, American, the Western world travels were a lot more, both for business, for vacations and stuff. So that could be one reason why, of course, it started in countries that were going to China and brought back the disease home, which is the way disease is transmitted anyway. Diseases are usually within the source, and that's why we try to contain diseases at first source. But once travels go around and you do not mitigate good mitigations to control the disease within the travel, it spreads. So that's one reason, travel. And two, maybe again, these are just observations. Being epidemiologists, we make observations, and then later we can do ecological and population studies to see what exactly is the real fact. So the other, it's so far from the initial epidemiological description of the disease, as you see, the social demographic distribution of disease shows it occurs more in the in with age. The higher the age, more so a lot of and a large percentage, over 90%, 98% of people who get the disease maybe may not come down with symptoms. They'll be well. So again, it may be there, and it might be that because the Africa population is principally more young than most of it. So the force, what we would otherwise call herd immunity, but in this case, not exactly herd immunity, but the population, the disease momentum is not as big in Africa as it is in places where you have populations that are older. So these are speculations, but they may make sense based on previous epidemiological understandings. The other thing we'd have looked at is weather, but we've seen that it has occurred in a country like America where we have diverse weather. It's occurring in Florida, which is warmer. It's occurring in Michigan, which is warmer, which is colder. So we can't pitch that
as
totally.
Seasonal. We can't make it a seasonal virus because we're seeing.
Yeah, but we know. Yeah, sure. But we know that generally respiratory viruses are more severe in cold temperature, in cold weather. And that's why flu comes in cold season. So those factors put together may be some of the reasons why it is a little slow. And the other core reason, which people think, which is that we're not testing as much as it's
Let me jump.
Any country where you testing, you get more. Yeah, sure.
Let me jump in because we'll get to the testing piece in a second. Because as you laid out the potential reasons for the slow rate of transmission, at least comparatively, travel and age, principally, the question of climate, again, still being looked at, but most people saying it's not a seasonal virus. Let me ask you this: in terms of this age piece and the question of it being the question of people being mostly asymptomatic or better yet getting it mildly, I mean, given the fact that we don't really know that, we begin the fact that we don't know that if you have it you become immune, or we don't know what the immunological response is, we still don't want to go that way of saying let it spread because we have a young population.
No.
Right? Because I've heard some people talk about herd immunity and how, well, there's so many young people on the continent, it's not going to kill us. So just let it spread. We'll get herd immunity. But we don't know that for sure, this question of immunity.
No, yeah, that would not be the approach. If it's protective, the fact, yes, you have a younger population, so people get the disease and they don't get severe consequences. It's the morbidity and the mortality is not high. That's not an excuse not to prevent the disease, because the death of one person, one elderly, matters a lot and costs a lot. So it's good to prevent it. We also, and then the other side, which people, like you said, we're not sure yet of the extent of the immune response and how long. From other respiratory diseases, you get, as you can see with flu, every year we have a new flu vaccine because of frequent mutation. Flu has not been able to confer a lifelong immunity. There are viruses and other bacteria, mostly infections, that have given, with the vaccines, you get lifelong immunity, things like yellow fever, polio, to reasonable number, but we're not sure of that with this, and I'm not sure it's also been proven with the other two coronavirus experiences that we have had. So it's an evolving situation, and the usual approach is to plan for the worst, expect the best. Yeah, you plan for the worst, expect the best. So we want to protect our people from, keep the rules of basic infection control that we've been told, so that the transmission is broken. It may turn out that this becomes a seasonal disease. We're not sure yet, but it may become that. So yeah, so if it does, then some people, it may be that the immunity, again, is not as strong. It can make the disease milder, but it will not prevent the disease. So there's still the need to protect, because we're talking of population health, not individuals. Yeah. So we need to protect those who are more vulnerable, and that means we have to protect individuals, break the transmission chain as much as possible.
And final question to you before I let you go, this question of mutation. I know that it is mutating slowly. What are we seeing? And I don't know if the data has emerged significantly, but what are we seeing in terms of strains of this virus? And what is the likelihood, or thinking back to past, you mentioned SARS and MERS, what is the likelihood that it mutates and does something different in Africa, that it takes on a different look, if you will?
Yeah. Well, it takes virus. We've been moving pretty fast with things with regards to this virus. A lot of the science is moving quite. Efforts to create vaccines. This is the fastest we've ever seen so far in the world of science and infectious disease, to a disease occurring within months, and you're already talking about vaccines. Mm-hmm. That's promising, but that also puts a snag on the fact that we don't know how this disease is going to evolve. If it's changing, if it's mutating, it's not likely to be just in Africa. When a virus mutates, it mutates, and wherever that serotype arrives, it will cause infection.
So viruses don't mutate in a particular way amongst a certain population or a certain genetic group, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's not our core experience so far. For instance, we've been dealing with polio for the past several decades. We've been trying to eradicate polio. And from time with polio is a virus, it's not a coronavirus, but it's also an RNA virus. And we've identified 3 serotypes, WP, the white polio virus 1, 2, and 3. And those 3 were found everywhere in the world, from Pakistan to India to America to Africa. It's been eradicated, it's been eliminated in a number of continents. Africa has been one of the last continents, Nigeria in particular. We had the type 2 was eliminated several years ago. Type 3 recently, and then type 1 is still there. For Nigeria, fortunately, with all the efforts and vaccines, in the last 3 years plus now, we have not seen a case of the white polio type 1. But the type 2 and type 3 that had been eliminated in other places has also been eliminated and remains so in Nigeria. In Pakistan, in Afghanistan, we're still seeing type 1, which is the last stop for polio eradication. I'm using that as an example to show that the serotypes are not confined so far from my experience to particular geographic locations.
Yeah. Fantastic insight, Professor. Really, really appreciate it. I hope you'll come back and share more of your insights in the weeks ahead. Professor Ohuabunwo.
Thank you, Aisha. You're doing great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please be safe.
Thank you. You stay safe and take care of the family.
Thank you. I will. I'll do my best. You as well. Yeah. Thank you. Bye. I don't know about you, but I found that fascinating. Just trying to get some insight into the virus, what it's doing, the way it's moving. Again, I want to preface it by saying we don't know what it will do next. This is a real-time story. It is moving, it is mutating. Now, albeit mutating slowly, but it is changing. And we watch that to see what we learn from its mutations. We look to see what we're learning in terms of the immunity question, the immune response. If you get this virus, how long are you immune for? Immune to what? Some people, is it a year? Is it longer? We just don't know the answer to that question. And this question of it moving slowly through Africa, comparatively, why? Still don't have a definitive answer on that, but we'll continue to speak to the brightest minds, people who are working in this field, who are studying it, who are looking at the data. We'll continue to speak to them and have those conversations with you so we can share what is known, and we'll just follow this story in real time. Okay, you've been writing in. Abby A says, fantastic insight indeed. Thank you for that, Abby. Desmond Cannis says the slow rate of infection in West Africa could be two reasons. 1, few testing kits. Our experience on infection prevention and control methods during the Ebola crisis has built the confidence of our health workers in dealing with infected people. Aminata Radia says, we do not know about immunity. So yes, Aisha, I agree. We cannot rely on the concept of herd immunity. Prevention and controlling transmission would be our best bet right now. Absolutely agree with you, Aminata, absolutely. Ramalf Jr. Kamara, Africa is soon to experience rains, and to all the other diseases Africans get during the rainy season makes me begin to worry. I'm hoping that African authorities will listen and try to do the needful by doing the testing of its citizens. I mean, yes. I mean, everything said, I agree with 100%. We need to step up the testing. We're testing, but we need to do more. We need the means to do more, to test more people, to get a sense of what is happening on the continent in terms of penetration of this disease. And again, the conversation tends to fully focus on the big cities. You know, we talk about the capital cities. There's, you know, the big cities in you know, Rwanda and Nigeria and Ghana and Sierra Leone. But what's happening in rural areas? That is something that I you know, continue to question how widespread the testing is there. And again, just the difficulties of maintaining lockdowns versus curfews. And if you have curfews, how successfully can you break the chain of transmission in a curfew versus obviously a lockdown where everybody has to shelter in place and cannot move at all. So lots of questions to discuss in the days ahead. And this comment from Mama Saloon, with such a slower spread in Africa, Bill Gates and others predict the worst to come in Africa. Yes, I mean, I think that's an important point that you're making, that it's kind of contradictory. I think it's the point that it has gotten to Africa slower than other parts of the world, but the feeling and the fear is that now that it is there, and given the way we live in certain areas with the population density, that now that it is there, it will move quicker. And it will sicken more people, and that due to underlying conditions in certain populations, like South Africa has about 7 to 8 million people with HIV. We know that malaria is an issue. We know that, you know, polio is an issue in some places. They're worried that with these endemic conditions, that the death rate will accelerate. So that's some of the reasons why, even though it was slow to get to Africa, now that it is in Africa, the fear is that we're going to see an acceleration in cases and sadly in deaths. Again, it's just modeling. We still don't quite know what's going to happen. That's the whole thing. They say all models are wrong, but they're useful. That's what epidemiologists say. All right, thank you for writing in. I'm going to continue to read those comments. I really appreciate you writing in and sharing your thoughts. So please keep those messages coming in. We talked about the disease. We've talked about, you know, the science, the health impact. I want to talk about, you know, the way it is really shaking the continent to its core, this pandemic. We know that some of the most beautiful places on earth to visit are in Africa. I'm thinking Table Mountain in South Africa, the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, Victoria Falls that you can see in Zambia and Zimbabwe, the pyramids in Egypt. I mean, there's so many beautiful spaces, beautiful places to visit, and tourism had been booming on the continent, you know, for the last few years. This year, in fact, 2020 had been dubbed the year of return in many countries, and we were looking forward to seeing a surge in numbers of people visiting the continent, and you know, by extension, hotels doing well, more jobs being created, and just a whole ecosystem flourishing thanks to tourism. That has all sadly come to a dramatic halt thanks to this pandemic. According to the African Union, Africa could lose at least 50 billion due to COVID, and they're talking about 2 million jobs being lost directly or indirectly thanks to the hit that the tourism sector will take. I want to talk more about all of this and really get a sense of how people are processing this kind of data and what steps can be taken to mitigate the fallout. Our next guest knows all about this. She is Executive Director of the African Tourism Association. Naledi Khabo joins me now from New York. Naledi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's so good to have you with us. Thank you. I mean, you just heard me share that statistic. According to the African Union report, the continent could be looking at losing something like 50 billion and losing something like 2 million direct and indirect jobs due to the hit the tourism sector is going to take from this pandemic. Talk to me about the fallout and give me some perspective on that data.
Well, I mean, I think every sector sort of across the economic spectrum is obviously being hit. Tourism is, for all intents and purposes, almost at a zero. And when you think about that, it's fueled by 80% of small and medium enterprises. And what's that doing to those businesses? It's really devastating. And so the key and the impact on represents about almost 8% of total employment across the continent is due to the industry flattening out is pretty devastating. So what you're seeing is a lot of nations trying to figure out ways, how do you still continue to support the sector? How do you support the sector from a distance? How do you continue to engage? Travel. I think something that this whole pandemic has done also is expose issues we already had, which are just now exacerbated, that now have to be addressed, whether we like it or not, whether it was innovating, looking at new marketing models, tapping new. In my old digital life, we used to say, you have to innovate or die. And I think the tourism sector is at that point now. It's not going to be the same ever again. I also think this is an opportunity to what the industry looks like moving forward and to ensure that we're in a better place when we sort of emerge from this pause.
Yeah. And so when we look at the continent, where are we seeing, I mean, again, 0 is 0 across the board, but, where the areas of greatest concern in terms of countries and regions when we talk about this tourism hit?
I think across the board, I think when you look at the major markets or the markets that people were talking about before COVID really hit, like in the trade show industries, it was the large markets like South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, and Ghana, of course, who I think had the significant growth over the last year. So I think there's obviously a significant letdown. But then when you look at those other secondary markets that, people don't consider, it's almost similar to your last conversation. Every sort of looks at the big tourism countries across the continent, but they're the smaller countries as well that are going to suffer, like Gambia, almost a more extensive rate, Seychelles, which is primarily tourism. We're talking about some countries, tourism may only represent 10%, but in other countries, it's 80%. Of the economy. So those countries like that are so tourism focused are going to be the most at risk in terms of coming out on the other side of this. And I mentioned this is the small and medium businesses, but also when you look at the informal businesses, they're suffering. They rely on the tourism industry for their livelihood. So I think that's the greatest concern when you look at the tour guides who, they're not necessarily considered as part of the hospitality all the time, sort of considered as part of the hospitality sector, but they're the backbone of the industry.
Naledi, did I lose you?
Is my connection slow?
It's just breaking up a little bit, but you're back now, so that's good. So talk to me about innovation. I mean, where does innovation come in at a time like this? How are people trying to buffer their sectors in various countries? Share some examples.
I think digitization and how people can still share experiences online, still connect to old customers, potential customers. I only challenge that, or I caution against that, because I fear that we've all sort of pivoted to virtual in how we're engaging with each other and in events. But when you think about the tech gap and the data limitations for so many across the continent, I feel that that gap is just going to widen. And I think that that's great if you have those resources, but how do we ensure that the small businesses that we're talking about, the formal businesses that I'm talking about, have access to that technology? Because even me, if I was home in South Africa right now, I'm not on this webinar. the bandwidth at my mother's house isn't fast enough. We're having problems right now, and I have great internet, and it's expensive. So when you think about the average small business person, how are they really engaging? Digitization is critical, but how do we make sure that they don't get left behind in the digitization of tourism? How do we make sure that they can take advantage of the platforms where we're talking about virtual tours and creating all this great content for the web if they don't have the tools and the means to do so?
I mean, I don't know if there's been much study of this. I mean, is there the demand for that kind of experience when it's coming out of Africa? Because I know I asked this, it's just a thought that came to my head, because I know that for a lot of people, it's about the weather, it's about the people, it's about that person-to-person experience. So I ask about, I'm not saying it can't work in the African context, I'm just asking, like, for your thinking, is that how successful that going to be for Africa versus, say, going to the Louvre, in France?
I actually think it can be very successful for Africa, because I think when you think about how people have first come to experience Africa who've never been, a lot of it is through fashion, it's through film, it's through music, it's through art. So you can still, and food, and you can still hit those touch points online to maintain their interest and to generate increased interest. So I think that's the way that you continue to engage people's interest in things on the continent. So when they're ready to travel again, now all of this music, all of this dance, all of these films that you've been consuming online, now come experience them in person. And I think that's, sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you out. I was going to just agree with you. I think that's the key difference. It's not a replacement. It's a kind of additive. It's to keep the interest going, right?
Right. Absolutely. Because I think people will want to travel again. I think, the industry, whether it's the airlines, the hotels, the tour guides, will have to clearly communicate what protocols they have in place, what they've done, clearly communicate and show and prove what they're doing in terms of what the future looks like. But I think once people start moving again, they're going to want to first go to places that they've stayed engaged with throughout this period. And I can see people are consuming content at rates, that are unimaginable. So now's the opportunity. Hit them with the online cooking classes, hit them with the dance steps, with the movies and all of those things, and they'll continue to thirst to experience that in person.
Yeah, such a great point. In terms of support from governments, I mean, I realize, there's a health crisis, in some countries, oil prices have collapsed. I mean, budgets are being stretched, GDP is contracting. Is the conversation being had about, in these various countries on the continent to support the sector, hotels, tourism, or, tour operators? I mean, what is the conversation in terms of support for the sector?
No, the conversations are definitely being had. Obviously, some countries are in a better financial position than others to lend direct financial support. I think you're seeing initiatives in countries such as Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, specifically for the tourism industry, with grants that are being established for small and medium enterprises. Other countries who are, sort of have general programs are including the tourism sector in those relief programs as well. In the private sector, there's a lot of independent and private initiatives. Even Tastemakers Africa has an initiative for small one-time grants that we partner with them on. But on the government level, you're seeing it where there's means. And as people are getting funding either internally or from third-party sources, tourism is a dedicated sector that is receiving funds, especially, again, the small and informal businesses. So it is on everyone's radar. I think that would respect in a few years in terms of the tourism sector, which didn't necessarily exist maybe 10 or 5 years ago. I think whenever anyone thought about the economy across Africa, it was sort of those larger sectors, oil, power, mining, natural resources and the like. And I think people have come to realize the impact that tourism has. So it's a serious consideration when looking at relief funds across the continent.
Naledi, Khabo, I'm so pleased we could get you on to share a different perspective of how this pandemic is affecting the continent and the key sector that is tourism. Thank you so much. Please be safe.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. See you again soon. All right. Naledi giving us some real perspective of how tourism has come to zero, essentially. On the continent, people aren't traveling. We all know that. A third of the world is under some kind of coronavirus-related restriction of movement. So travel is not what's on people's mind, or leisurely travel is not on people's mind right now. But she makes the point that there is an opportunity here for digitization of the industry, and that there's been the need for this before this moment, and this is really forcing people to kind of step that up, and that we're not looking at replacing tourism with digitization or with tech or with these online experiences, but using them as a complement, if you will, so we can expose people to what Africa has to offer when it comes to tourism. They can take part in video online classes. They can experience the music. They can see the dancing. They can maybe do some dance classes if they wish. But the point is, they can still taste it. And then once the world gets to some place of normalcy where people are able to travel again and people feel safe and have the money to travel again, they are ready to go and make that a reality. So I think that was a really, really good point. Let's get to some of your comments. You have been writing in today. Alpha Yaya Mansaray says, Sierra Leone tourism has taken a dramatic turnaround before the outbreak. It took almost 2 years for the current leadership to rebrand Sierra Leone as a tourist destination. Bringing that trust and confidence back will be a very difficult task. It will, but we're hopeful that we will be able to get there. Long and difficult, yes, but we're not giving up hope that we can achieve that. Khabo Alavali says African tourism needs to be more innovative so that it can gain a competitive advantage. Africa has the monument and touristic sites, but it is not easy. Mama Salone says support and empower the creative communities in Africa. Enormous talents stagnated by lack of resource. Really great comments, really important comments, and I want to thank you for writing in as always. Keep them coming in, and I will continue to read your thoughts and share them with everyone, so thank you for that. All right, so moving on, Greek philosopher Plato said, necessity is the mother of invention. And despite the uncertainty of these times, we are seeing innovation and new inventions coming to the forefront as we the coronavirus. A California-based drone company called Zipline has used their drones to deliver vital equipment, vital necessities, vital supplies to parts of the continent that need it most. Take a look at this. So you see there, that's the drone. This company, Zipline, is using drones to deliver masks, gloves, COVID-19 test samples, operating in Ghana. That was the drone taking off. I find this incredible. That's the recipient. Amazing. Tech bridging the gap. And it is just incredible to see how this moment is being transformed by new technologies, new inventions, and the innovations that were already in operation are being scaled up and used in this moment of great need. Let's bring in Daniel Marfo. He's a general manager for Zipline, and he joins me now live from Ghana. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, Aisha.
Whenever I see that video, my mouth is just open. I just can't believe that. I not even so much I can't believe it. I think I'm just so heartened to see how tech and innovation is stepping in this moment. Can you tell me a little bit about Zipline and what you're doing right now during this pandemic?
All right, thank you. So Zipline is a healthcare logistics company, and we primarily reimagine what logistics could look like. So we're bringing the future today, if I can put it that way. And essentially, even before COVID-19, what we've been doing in Ghana is delivering blood products, medical products, vaccines to focusing on the rural communities where the roads are terrible. If it rains, communities are cut off from the city centers, and making sure that the people there are not left out when it comes to having vital medical supplies. Now, focusing on COVID-19, what we've been doing is we've still been continuing what we are doing routinely. supplying medicines, medical products, vaccines, blood. Empowering the frontline health workers by making sure we can deliver to them PPEs, hand sanitizers, the test kits that they need in case they have suspected COVID-19 patients. And as recently as last week, we took another step where we are now reverse logistics, where we are bringing suspected samples that have been taken from patients to the two main testing labs in the two largest cities of Ghana. And it's very exciting for us because it's the first time that autonomous drones have actually been cleared to fly into urban areas, having millions of people. It's the first time that any drone company has been able to use reverse logistics to deliver test samples from a rural area into an urban area. And we've just gone from a place where we've empowered these people who would have had to make hours and hours of drive journey into the city center to deliver the samples, to get it from there to the testing labs in under an hour.
And I just want to jump in there on that point of time. I mean, time is of the essence, you know, in a fight like this against coronavirus. And you are recalibrating you're recalibrating the response in some ways. I mean, talk to me about the difference this makes when you're saving time in this way.
Yeah, it's just incredible. So just imagine being in a small village, and you're a frontline health worker, and you have two suspected patients who have COVID come. You're in a small village, so you don't have the luxury of an ambulance. You don't have the luxury of being able to just have a vehicle on hand which can whisk away to the city center. So the practice is they try to even organize the vehicle before they start testing these people. Mm-hmm. So you would at times just want to gather maybe 5-6 suspected patients before you even try to put it in a vehicle, to send, because it's not efficient that way if you're in a village. And imagine the anxiety that someone who has reported to the hospital, maybe negative, maybe positive. Imagine the anxiety of just being kept telling you to wait for 2 days for your sample to be taken. It's wrenching. Yeah. So being able to say that, look, you walk in, we can take your sample almost immediately. We can get your sample from that point to the city center and have a quick turnaround of your results so that we know whether we're supposed to treat you or send you home. It's just life-changing for those people.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, what are some of the associated challenges, though, with operating something like this, in this kind of environment? I mean, talk to me. It must have some I don't want to say difficulty, but challenges. Give us some insight.
Yeah. Yes. So the initial challenges that we had was actually getting approval to be able to fly something like this safely. As you can imagine, flying biohazards in any standard is very difficult, but flying it autonomously is quite challenging in its own way. So to work with aviation regulators to get the necessary approvals. As you can imagine, there is COVID is quite new, so there isn't a lot of information. So we had to do a lot of engineering, working with a lot of stakeholders on how we can even transport this safely. And working, assuming, the drone couldn't even make it there. How do we make sure we don't expose people? So those were some of the real challenges. And also working with our healthcare stakeholders to give them confidence to even use this. It's quite challenging in that right. But with the frontline health workers, they were most relieved to be able to have this as an option to get the samples to the testing labs.
You're operating in Ghana, that I know. What about further afield, other countries? What's happening?
So we also operate in Rwanda, And in Rwanda, we are still working with our partners there to see if we can get to the point of using drones to transport samples. But the other things we're doing in Rwanda is we are focusing on providing relief for cancer patients who, because of the strict lockdown, can no longer come into the city center for their chemotherapy treatment. As you can imagine, some of them are on medications that they can only get from the hospitals. So what we've done there is, if they can't come to the city center, we'll get their medications to them. So we've partnered with the nearest health facilities to these patients, and we are flying their cancer medication once it's been approved by their doctors in Kigali and getting it to them there. And it's been a huge relief. One thing people forget about COVID-19 is there are a lot of chronic patients, diabetics, hypertensive, who because of this cannot easily go to the hospital. And a sad secondary effect is these people might also lose their lives. So if we're able to get their medications and using other technologies like telemedicine, and we stepping in and providing an ability to get their medications to them exists, we are not just saving those who would have COVID-19, but potentially the millions of people who might be secondary, should I use, casualties of the current state.
Yeah. Well, Daniel Marfo, it's incredible work that you guys are doing. It is timely. It's a necessity. I want to thank you for joining us here today, just to share some insights into the work Zipline is doing. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, and thank you for making time for us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care now. I don't know about you, but I found that, again, really interesting. I mean, to see tech in motion and to see this kind of innovation and the difference it's making. I mean, to hear him talk about the difference for people having their test samples processed so quickly, or so much faster than the norm in some places where you have to wait a couple of days before they take your sample to the city and before they come back and give you a result. I just found that really, really remarkable. And the hope is that these kinds of innovations are going to be scaled up and will be across the continent, because this is a pandemic that is just that. It's a pandemic. It's everywhere. So we need to see this kind of thing in play in countries across the continent and to see the difference it can make. So that was really amazing. Let me share a couple more comments before we go, because it's almost top of the hour. Ramif Jr. Kamara says, Edmund Binoni, please see if it's possible to share ideas with this company. Desmond, can I come to Sierra Leone? Your company will not face some of these challenges that I guess they faced in Ghana. We have a good foundation, and for us in Sierra Leone, innovation is part of this government agenda. Your company is welcome. Desmond Kane welcoming Zipline to Sierra Leone there. Ramif Junior Kamara again, wow, that is so wonderful, keep it up. And Matilda Jalla, a lot of people here saying Zipline come to Sierra Leone. So Daniel, if you're still watching, you might want to check out Sierra Leone. There is I'm told, even as a Sierra Leone, I'm told there's a market for you there. So you should check out Sierra Leone. Gloria Sabatu Kurma, much love and respect to you, Aisha. Thank you for that. Again, lots of people just writing in saying, Adejo, Victor David, that is a very great innovation and timely. Ruslek, super and impressive. Aminata Radisal, impressive. A lot of people really excited by seeing those drones and what they're doing, the difference they're making in a place like Ghana. They're also operating in Rwanda, but it's not specifically in relation to COVID-19. But my hope is that the next time Daniel's on the show, he's going to be telling us about the other markets that Zipline is operating in. You continue to write in, and we are so appreciative of the messages and the fact that you take time out of your day to spend time with me. No bright side today, so that's it for today's show, but we will be back with a brand new show tomorrow. And in case you missed it, Jordana will be with me on the bright side tomorrow on Instagram. So the classic man himself will be with me. We'll be spending time with me to talk about these crazy times we're living in. So do tune in for that. I'll be back here. I'll be back 12 o'clock Pacific. But that's it for today's show. Hope to see you right here, same time, same place tomorrow. Be safe, everyone. Bye for now.